This is the title page slide for the Module 3 assignment. In this presentation, I will be going over federal legislation in special education, least restrictive environment, and how this all connects to Isabella's IEP. This is the table of contents slide, which shows what each slide will be about in this presentation. This is the definitions slide, which goes over definitions and terms that will be used and gone over throughout this presentation. This is the federal legislations and special education slide. The first federal legislation is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This is a federal law that prohibits discrimination based on disability in any program or activity operated by recipients of federal funds. 504 plans outline accommodations and supports a school must provide to a student with a disability, ensuring that they can access the same education as their peers by removing barriers to learning and allowing them to participate fully in school activities, all while receiving a free and appropriate public education. The next legislation is the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a federal law that protects people with disabilities from discrimination in many areas of public life. The ADA guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else. And one final federal legislation in special education is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal law that guarantees free and appropriate public education for students with disabilities. IDEA also ensures that students receive special education and related services overseen by a committee on special education. Federal legislation in Isabella's IEP. IDEA is represented throughout her IEP by the descriptions of her behaviors and the present level statements. They contain information to help provide Isabella with the most appropriate and successful education for her and create an inclusive and positive learning environment. The Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 are represented through the accommodations and modifications that Isabella receives in her IEP. The extra time and separate locations for her testing, as well as counseling services, are accommodations and modifications for Isabella that are put in her IEP to allow her to succeed in the general education curriculum. Least restrictive environment. Least restrictive environment means that a child with a disability must be educated within the same classroom as typical mainstreamed non-disabled peers to the fullest extent possible in order to ensure that a disabled child is receiving a free and appropriate public education. Least restrictive environment promotes inclusion among students with and without disabilities by allowing students with disabilities to be involved in the general education curriculum through any modifications and accommodations necessary. LRE also helps to improve academic success and increase access to educational opportunities. Least restrictive environment in Isabella's IEP. The LRE is represented throughout the entire IEP, similar to IDEA, as the least restrictive environment is described throughout IDEA. Her IEP is created to allow her to be able to participate in the general education curriculum with every other student in her least restrictive environment. The accommodations and modifications that are being made for Isabella throughout her IEP help her to overcome her disability and succeed in the general education curriculum and be in her least restrictive environment. Her present level statements give productive details about her behaviors and needs to help her improve her skills in the many different subject areas and goals. And the goals on her IEP help to guide her and her teacher in improving her skills and succeeding. Thoughts on Isabella's IEP. Isabella's IEP includes useful information that will be very helpful in setting up a successful learning environment for her. Her test scores provide key details about her current present level performance as well as her strengths and weaknesses. This gives important insight into where her goals need her to get by the end of the year. Isabella is portrayed in a positive way throughout a lot of her IEP. She is described using strength-based language in her present level statements as well as in her physical and social managements. The management needs and effect on student needs and involvement and progress in the GE curriculum do an adequate job of describing her needs and weaknesses. This can be useful in needing to create annual goals and see what modifications and accommodations she might need. Connections to myself as a future educator. As a future educator, you have to deal with all different types of students with different backgrounds, abilities, resources, and more. Therefore, it is crucial to always create an inclusive and positive learning environment that promotes learning and success for all students. Knowing about students that have IEPs and how to make their learning experiences easier and more successful can improve their learning environment. Creating lessons with modifications is extremely important for all students. This allows for all students to have a chance to succeed even if they are struggling with the original tasks. Having modifications for not only students who are struggling, but also students who are overly skilled at the tasks can ensure for an inclusive environment in which all students are set up for success. Being collaborative with the IEP team members for the students with IEPs can also help to create a more successful environment for that student in all types of learning. And finally, this is the references page. These are the documents in which I use to get my information throughout this presentation.